I've got the A major scale, and I've gotten
Okay.
okay at that.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I'm starting to worry about is once I add other scales, how do I keep them from overlapping on each other? And
Hmm.
uh, like how do I keep the distinctness of the of A from all of the other keys? And
Hmm.
how like what's your strategy for uh basically like keeping the knowledge of all the scales
Right.
distinct?
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah, okay. Just to make sure that I follow what you're saying. So, when you say keeping, the things that are in the A major scale distinct, do you mean like the A major scale, like from the B major scale, for example, or do you mean
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Like if you're, say I only have time to practice like, I don't know, six scales or something. Um, or I don't know, like like do you spend like, 1 week practicing one scale and then practice like the next one the next week, or like uh it's a similar, I guess, like um challenge to having to keep track of multiple fretboards, but
right, yeah, yeah. Okay, yeah,
yeah.
I think I follow what you're saying. Okay, so yeah, so I think the best way that I can start to talk about this is more in terms of like the learning process than in
Mhm.
terms of like if you were to just try to do everything all at the same time. So the reason that I go really hard with the major scale and really just with the A major scale, it's something I kind of specifically chosen with students for a while. It's just like it's a major scale. I'll do C with this person because they're learning something that's in C. I'll show this person the E major scale or whatever. And I've started to
Yeah.
just kind of like smooth it out to the A major scale just so that I can like introduce things gradually in the same way with people. And as I've built this into like a program, I've picked A. Yeah, okay. So it really helps to learn one scale really well because the things that you learn by going really deep into one scale make all the other scales a lot easier to learn. Whereas if somebody's trying to learn a ton of scales, they're kind of getting the surface level information, about like maybe, oh, I have to put this finger here, this finger here. But if they're not building this relationship where like, they know where three is, or they know where four is, or they know where seven is, um, then it's kind of just putting like memorizing, putting their fingers in a bunch of places. But if there isn't like a really concrete like sonic reason for it and really concrete like creative reason for it, those things are a lot less likely to stick. And so what
Yeah.
you're doing where you're building this relationship, this sort of like aural relationship to the A major scale is really awesome. So the way that it kind of unfolds in the program is that they're basically phase two and phase three go a lot more into perceiving how the A major scale relates to the chords that are changing beneath it. And I keep it
Okay.
intentionally pretty simple. I mean, you're progressing at a really fantastic pace. It's really awesome to see it. So I'm super down to go deeper into it or to give you more information about it from kind of a bigger picture perspective. But yeah, I
Mhm.
really, after working with a bunch of students, I just really wanted to make sure that when people were using the A major scale, after we get it across the fretboard, because that's just like a thing that a lot of people don't have. And so it's nice to be able to give people this big like unlock right
Yeah.
away.
Yeah.
I've kind of structured phases two and three to really be about like sensitizing people to like how special every note in the scale is. And so
Okay.
whereas like a lot of guitar education stuff is like learn a billion things right now. Don't worry about what they're for or how to use them well. I try to go
Yeah.
really deep into this. And so I'm excited about all of that. But what you're asking is also really important because there's a lot of music in the world and there are a lot of skills besides the A major scale. And so
Mhm.
choosing to focus on it is kind of like a pedagogical like tool that like shuts out some of the noise. And so
Mhm.
one of the things that comes up, I believe in phase two, maybe in phase three, is that really we're actually playing two different modes when we play over A major seven to D major seven. And
Yeah.
so yeah, yeah. And so really we're playing both A major or A Ionian and also D Lydian.
Yeah.
And yeah, and they're all the same like shapes and stuff, but there's going to be like a visualization, kind of like internalization process where you start to look at the D Lydian mode. And what I'll ask you to do is to practice it as if it's the D Lydian mode and try to forget that it's the A major scale. So when you play the F sharp on the low E string, you're thinking major third and not major sixth. And
Mhm.
so you basically have to like remap. Even you have all the muscle memory, which makes it go physically faster because
Yeah.
like you
Yeah.
do know the skill, but you have to like pretend that you don't in order to learn all these new like personalities for the notes. But for
Yeah.
me, when I was trying to learn a bunch of modes, and then there's another thing, if we change the root, if we're talking about B major rather than A major, that's like something I'll talk about in a second. But for now, if we're just talking about learning modes, when I was trying to learn modes, it would get really overwhelming. Um, I mean, for one thing, if I was trying to play like a 2-5-1, let's say an A, and I know that I'm supposed to play B Dorian over the 2, and then E Mixolydian over the 5, and then A major over the 1, I'd be playing on like the 7th fret, like kind of an A Dorian sort of thing, and then I'd go up to like the 12th fret for like E
Mhm.
Mixolydian, or the open string, and then I'd go back to the 5th fret for A major,
I see.
and
As
so
opposed to
and
just like you could do all that in the same position, just like different. Is that what
Yeah,
you're?
that's one of the things. It's super inefficient, and like if it meant that if things are going by in 2 beats and we're
Mhm.
at quarter equals 180, that's a problem because
Yeah.
it's just incredibly inefficient to try to move around the guitar that way, and it's totally like counter musical, you know.
Mhm.
So yeah, so what I had to do was learn, for example, all the positions of B Dorian, all the positions of E Mixolydian, and they are technically the same as each other. But when I
Yeah.
really learned them as separate scales and I practiced them as separate scales and I practiced moving between them, what I started to be able to do was visualize the personality of each note relative to the root so that I'd have control over the sounds of each chord. And then what this really becomes is like being able to deal with harmony and playing over chord changes and stuff like that. And I
Mhm.
think so much of the way that that's taught on guitar is really all about just like learning a million things. And this is why so many people get really frustrated and stop with the way that jazz guitar is taught, because I think it's really not taught very well. Whereas people who play other instruments, I think, have a much more kind of clear path to learning something like that. And so, yeah, so the way that this is first introduced in the program that I've set up is just being like, well, you've got A major and you've also got D Lydian. And then I also introduced triads in phase two. And
Mhm.
so that's another way to start to really deal with D being different than A. And even though the major scale works over both of them, the notes all change personality when the chord changes personality. So just
Yeah.
starting to get people's hands on those things and have them start to deal with it. And obviously different people are going to progress at different rates and you're progressing really quickly, like which is just so awesome to see. And so yeah, so I'd be curious once you get through some of the triad stuff to talk more about yeah, like using triads to create contrast between the A chord and the D chord.
Mhm.
Um, okay, but so that's kind of in the context of the program how it's laid out. There's also kind of like a phase four, which is after phase three, where it really becomes much more about this.
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, I want to like make sure that people really know one skill before I start giving them other skills. The other thing that I think really helps with learning the one skill before you learn the other ones is that once you know where seven is, for example, in the scale,
Yeah.
if you're learning different modes of A, then you're not learning like just like a new fret, but you're being able to visualize the seventh, but be like, oh, it's a minor seventh rather than a major seventh, and that's why it's this fret. So you have all of this context that lets you really have a relationship to the scale even as you're learning it. And
Yeah.
then, of course, the challenge there, which is something that I had a problem with for a long time, was not assuming that because you intellectually know it, that you physically know it and you can play it in real time. Because
Yeah.
because when I did that, it would sound like I was always thinking as I was playing, like, and that, but like not in a good way. Like, oh,
Right.
this person knows that note's the right note, but you can hear them waiting a second to like be like, oh, how am I going to do that? So
Yeah.
obviously, then you need to practice the actual scale, but it's a lot easier once you have the muscle memory and and the visualizing skills and the aural skills that'll help you really have a relationship to all those notes. So if you have the minor scale and you have a minor third and a minor sixth and a minor seventh rather than major third, major sixth, major seven in the major scale, you can just start to find those things much more easily. Um, so yeah, and then with different modes, it's just different, or at least modes of the major scale, it's just different combinations of things that are major and minor. But
Mhm.
we're still just dealing with the same seven intervals. So that's one, and obviously the way to do it is to just practice it and start improvising with it, and like practicing those modes. I think it's better to do like one at a time and go deep with it, but at the same time, the more that you do that, the less time that it takes to internalize it. So I think that if you were to practice A minor after doing this with A major, you'd be able to cover a lot of ground much more quickly. Then the other question is, how do you move the root around? So if you're playing A major, how much is that going to port over to B major, for example?
Right. Yeah.
Um, and I think, at least in my experience, the answer is that it definitely ports over like a lot, but it still helps to practice the other scale.
Mhm.
because there are a lot of very subtle things that change. Like B major root six below is the same shape as A major root six below. It's just starting on a different fret. And so what changes, are like the positions of the dots, change very slightly. The size of the frets changes like very slightly. And you just have to think about it a little bit more when you're in a new key. And so I think it's worthwhile to try practicing this stuff. Yeah, like I mean, in all keys, or at least in multiple like relevant keys. And there are a
Yeah.
few different ways that you can break that up. So it's like if you want to think about it as kind of just like an intellectual exercise and be kind of prepared for every situation, you can just
Mhm.
do a thing where you play, for example, A major, root six below, B flat major, root six below, B major, root six below, C major, and just walk the shape all the way up the fretboard. And you can do that with all the different major scale shapes and stuff.
Yeah, I think
So yeah,
that's where I start to worry about like uh I don't know, my brain overwriting itself and being like,
totally.
well, there's like
Okay,
almost
yeah,
too
yeah.
much
Then
control at that point.
I've got another perspective on this, which is that
Okay.
like I think it's worth doing that a little bit.
Okay.
Just so that you get comfortable with having a relationship to the root six below shape as a shape instead
Yeah.
of being like it always starts on the sixth or on the fifth fret, you
Yeah.
know? So that helps to kind of remove the experience of the shape from the key that you're first learning it in. But
Got
there's
it.
something else that actually Julian Lage said to me when I got to hang out with him when he was like 21, when I was like
Hmm.
21, and he was like 27 or something, which is crazy because he seems like a real grown up. But he was like, yeah, like the thing about people who talk about playing things in all keys is that then you just kind of know it in all keys. Like so,
Yeah.
so it's like not that effective. So the way that I'd really recommend doing it has to do with like repertoire. And so if there are like tunes that you're working on that you're particularly interested in and you want to
Mhm.
solo over them like with a band, then what you can do is start working out like let's say the tune that you're working on is in D and you want to solo in D. Then that gives you a reason, a really concrete reason to start getting to know the D major scale in all positions, for example. Um, and so then maybe there's another tune that you want to work on that's in C, or that's in A minor. And so when you have these specific repertoire goals that you're going to use in a live context, this gives you a way to start taking these skills that are very like I don't want to say that they're not applied, but they're kind of like applied in this kind of like ideal space for learning. It's
Yeah.
like um and you're kind of carrying those things over to spaces for real practical application in gigging and in playing music with other people and stuff. And so I think the question becomes yeah, like as far as learning it in other keys, beyond just getting kind of comfortable being able to move it around like chromatically up and down just for the sake of doing it,
Yeah.
like a little bit. Yeah, just like working with the tunes that you're working on, and just letting that create fretboard challenges for you.